Okay, so this critique is looking at a transcript that compares the media reaction to two big celebrity press tours. On one hand, you have Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo for Wicked, and on the other, Sydney Sweeney and Amanda Seyfried. The whole thing is really digging into whether there's a racial double standard at play.
And right off the bat, I have to say, the evidence you've gathered is incredible.
It really is. The pace makes such a strong case about the Wicked tour being unusual. And it's because of this one specific, almost unbelievable detail you found.
That's the core strength, for sure.
Yeah, the part where Ariana Grande is literally delivering lines verbatim from Cynthia Erivo's own memoir in an interview. You call it intentional, creepy, and it gives the whole analysis so much weight. It's undeniable.
It's phenomenal work. I mean, that detail is just gold, because it takes the whole conversation out of the realm of, speculating about body language or vibes.
Exactly.
It grounds the entire critique in objective recorded fact. So the task now is just to make sure that powerful piece of evidence is deployed for maximum logical effect, especially when you get into that double standards debate.
I can see that. Okay, so let's get into the first point, because it's about tightening up that very argument. So while you have this superior evidence of weirdness in the Grande and Erivo tour, the analysis needs to sharpen the distinction between the actor's objective behavior and the media and fan reaction to it. That's the key to really addressing the double standard debate head on.
That is such a crucial distinction. Right now, I think the weakness is that the argument really leans on just asserting that the Grande and Erivo dynamic is, objectively worse.
Yeah, it lists all the evidence, the inappropriate touching, the sobbing, that memoir copying.
Right. And by doing that, it almost pivots away from the original question, which was, is Amanda Seyfried behaving just as disturbingly but getting a pass because of race?
It kind of dismisses that question too early. And look, the degree of weirdness doesn't, on its own, disprove the idea that the media's interpretation could still be biased.
Exactly. You might argue the behavior is so bizarre it has to get scrutiny, but that doesn't really account for media framing, does it? The same outlets could easily frame Seyfried's constant touching of Sweeney as, supportive or maternal,
instead of possessive or dark, which is what some fans are trying to put.
So this is where we need to bring in the idea of narrative control. The suggestion here is to explicitly connect that amazing evidence back to the reason the racial double standard argument falls apart in this specific comparison.
Okay.
You should use the sheer volume of weird, verifiable behavior as a narrative control problem, not just as proof that they were weird.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about proving they were weirder. It's about proving their verifiable weirdness was on such a scale that it actually broke the media's ability to spin a positive story.
That is spot on. That's the whole question. What happens when celebrity behavior crosses a certain threshold of documented absurdity?
So for a concrete example, instead of just saying there's far more evidence for Grande and Erivo, I could reframe it.
Yeah.
Something like the sheer documented volume of bizarre behavior, especially that verbatim memoir quote, completely overwhelmed any attempt by the PR teams to manufacture a softer narrative.
Yes, that framing makes the argument so much stronger. It introduces a logical control fact. The media can't just ignore a celebrity on tape quoting another celebrity's memoir back to them.
It's too specific. It can't be brushed off as, a bad camera angle or fan overreaction.
Precisely. And that makes the racial bias critique structurally weak in this specific instance, not because racism doesn't exist, but because the actors handed the media an unspinnable pile of weirdness to report on.
And to really sharpen that contrast, I could use the Sydney Sweeney example more effectively. The material notes that fans are trying to say she's possessive based on, tiny facial expressions.
Which is a perfect illustration of a manufactured controversy.
Right, where people are just imprinting their own worldview onto really ambiguous behavior.
And you contrast that directly with the Erivo and Grande case, where people are reacting to documented absurdity, the verifiable recording. If you focus the critique there on the difference between imprinting on ambiguity versus reacting to documentation, the whole debate gets elevated.
It becomes an analysis of how evidence thresholds impact media framing.
Exactly. And that failure of narrative control you just established It actually creates a fantastic bridge to the next area we should talk about, which is the overall structure.
Yes, because that whole discussion of PR strategy and media control, it opens up a much bigger conversation, but right now the piece sort of struggles to connect all those dots. The material introduces several really fascinating high-level points about celebrity, career strategy, and even box office performance, but they currently feel, disconnected, which reduces the piece's overall impact.
That's the main challenge, I think. We go from this really intense analysis of the two press tours straight into, well, a few unrelated topics.
Yeah, suddenly we're talking about the box office failure of Wicked and blaming it on competition from Zootopia 2 and Avatar.
And then there's this really detailed digression on Sydney Sweeney's career struggles. You know, her wanting to be an artist and a sex symbol at the same time without them really feeding each other.
And those sections are individually super insightful. That breakdown of Sweeney's strategic problem is brilliant, but together they make the whole piece feel a bit fragmented.
It feels like three separate, very strong essays that haven't quite been woven into a single unified piece.
Right.
So the suggestion is really about creating a unifying framework. We need a banner, an idea that connects the press tour behavior from the first critique to these broader business and branding failures. Something that shows why this bizarre press tour is more than just gossip.
We could maybe unite the whole thing around the struggle for authenticity versus like corporate synergy and how that tension is what's poisoning these promotional campaigns.
That is a perfect frame. You could unify the piece under the banner of, say, the press tour as a symptom of failed branding.
I like that.
It lets you argue that the bizarre, manufactured dynamic between Grande and Erivo, the rehearsed memoir lines, all of it, is a symptom of Hollywood desperately trying to force synergy no matter how fake it looks.
And then you can contrast that manufactured synergy failure with Sweeney's completely different branding failure.
Which is?
Her refusal to use her marketable sex appeal in her film roles, choosing these more artistic projects instead. It's a different kind of disconnect.
Yes, exactly. One is a failure of forcing synergy past the point of authenticity, and the other is a failure of using the synergy that's already there. They're both systemic branding problems.
That brings the Wicked box office point right back into the main thesis, too.
How so?
Well, you can use its predicted failure as proof that even a press tour that gets a ton of attention doesn't guarantee success if the whole thing feels fundamentally inauthentic to people.
That's right. It proves that authentic viewer reaction matters more than manufactured controversy at the end of the day. It connects the gossip to the money.
It elevates the whole conversation into a critique of business strategy and, modern identity management.
Perfect. That ties up the structural issues really nicely. So, for the final point, we should probably talk a little about the voice and tone the material uses when it's confronting some of those fan theories we mentioned.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because all the authority you build up with the great investigation and the smart structural critique, it can be easily undermined if the tone isn't right when you're engaging with your critics.
When addressing the counter-arguments and defenses of the behavior, the material uses some highly charged dismissive language, and that undercuts its own analytical rigor. It risks alienating part of the audience.
The weakness is pretty clear. You have phrases describing the people defending the Wicked tour as, quote, so freaking delusional.
Or saying something is a completely reasonable reaction to your insane behavior. It just sounds a little reactive, like online commentary.
I agree. That sharp, opinionated tone starts to diminish the analytical authority, especially when you're tackling really sensitive and important topics like misogyny or structural racism. If the goal is to show how those concepts are being misapplied here, the counterargument has to be really considered and analytical.
Not just dismissive.
Exact. So the suggestion for improvement is to maintain that critical stance, the idea that the double standard argument isn't supported by the evidence in this case, but to adopt a tone that analyzes the reasoning and the rhetorical strategy of the defenders.
Instead of just judging them.
Right. Focus on what they're doing with their words.
So this means talking about the concept of a rhetorical pivot. Instead of just saying, the people defending them seem so freaking delusional, I could analyze that move as a strategic maneuver.
Yes. You could rephrase it to something like, the defense often attempts to pivot the focus from the celebrity's specific observable conduct to these broad systemic issues of misogyny,
effectively attempting to shield the individuals from criticism by invoking these larger, necessary critiques.
See? That is a far more sophisticated and authoritative way to handle it. It acknowledges the importance of the systemic issue while also showing how they're being, maybe, weaponized to shut down a specific conversation.
It maintains the high ground. And I see the same issue when the piece talks about hyperbole. You mentioned that Stan accounts are comparing the scrutiny to, like, the abuse of Britney Spears in 2007.
Yeah, and the current material just kind of dismisses that comparison as unbelievable.
But we need to analyze the comparison itself with a more detached eye. So instead of just scoffing at it, I could ask, do these specific actions, a very strange press tour, really warrant a historical comparison to confirmed institutional abuse?
Or is the comparison just a form of hyperbole designed to derail the discussion?
Yes, to stifle any criticism of the behavior that's happening right now.
Analyzing the false equivalence. Rather than just dismissing the fans, make sure you stay in that objective, analytical role. And that shift in tone will absolutely maximize the credibility of the whole piece.
Okay, this is all incredibly helpful. This submission has, I think, a ton of potential, mostly because of that amazing groundwork with the memoir quote. So to quickly summarize the main points for improvement.
Go for it.
First, refine the logical distinction between celebrity behavior and the media reaction. Use that objective weirdness as proof of a PR strategy failure, a loss of narrative control.
Second, unify the whole analysis around a clear, cohesive thesis. Something like the press tour as a symptom of failed branding, to connect all those disparate threads about the box office and career strategy.
And third, just calibrate the tone to maintain that analytical authority, especially with the counter-arguments. Focus on analyzing the rhetoric of the defenses rather than just dismissing the people who are making them.
These changes are really all about making sure the structure and the tone match the high quality of your investigation. The evidence you have is so powerful, and this will just make the argument that much more sound.
We really encourage you to revise the transcript based on these suggestions and send your updated work back in. We would be absolutely delighted to offer a follow-up critique.